All right, so welcome everyone. It's good to see so many faces again. It's been a while since we've been together. I apologize that we haven't had a meeting in quite a few months. We've been busy doing some things on our end, but we haven't been able to meet partly because of winter, partly because I've had some health issues. So it's nice to finally be back and see everyone. So really the purpose of tonight is to just kind of catch people up on what we've been working on, where we are, especially now that we're in the spring, about to head into the spring, summer, fall, which fingers crossed we won't have more flooding, but I know we did just experience some flooding in some locations. So this is our chance to kind of touch base and think about where we're going to be going. So quick reminder, since it's been a little while. So our organization started back in March of 2020. Diane and I started it in response to apply for this particular grant through the Thriving Earth Exchange, which is part of the American Geological Union. And they're the ones who put us in touch with some hydrologists. So through that, we've been able to work with Claire Zarakis right here. She is our community science fellow, which we touch base with a couple times a year. And through her, we've been able to work with these three hydrologists, Dr. Wendy Robertson, Mr. Scott Dirks, and Dr. Rod Lammers. We also have Emma Geis, which I realize is not on the image here. We'll need to add her, but she's also a hydrologist who works with Scott, and she's been able to help us as well. So we see them periodically. I'm hoping in about 10 minutes or so, Wendy's going to actually come join and be able to talk a little bit about the data we collected last year. But some quick things. Apparently, I have a tiny human who might join in a second here and say hi. So we have, so in the past couple weeks, we had a recent crest. And so I know some folks were taking photos. We have some photos here. This is from, I believe it was Dale Phillips' house. We also have some photos here from the park in the Cove area. Yeah, so you can see these pictures were taken when the river, I believe, was actually below the 6.5 feet. So this time the river reached 6.51 feet, which in the current standing is what's considered action stage. It previously was flood stage, now it's action stage. So these photos were taken actually when the water was even below that. So we can see already we're getting to flooding level even below what's now action stage, where now the flood stage is considered 7 feet. So folks during that time did record data on the iFlood app, which was really helpful. I know Carrie's been wonderful coordinating that. Thank you, Carrie, for coordinating that. And that data has been really helping us be able to collect information. As I said, these photos were taken when the river was below 6.5 feet. So this is for us to be able to go back to the township and say, hey, we actually are flooding at 6.5 feet. Can we change the flood level back down to the 6.5 feet versus the 7 feet it's at now? So we're hoping to be able to gather this information we took this time, as well as the data we've been collecting in the rivers, and be able to come back to the township with that. So also with that, the great thing too, for many reasons, is that on April 1st, Carrie coordinated efforts with Dale Phillips, Jeff Henry, Diane Henry, and Mark Tembrink, who are on the call here. They all worked together to actually install the gauges. So there's 2 gauges on South Ore Creek. There's 2 gauges on Dubrova Creek, and there's also a gauge monitoring the water flow at the outlet of Little Ore into the Huron River. And so this is allowing us to collect data on what's coming in upstream. So the National Weather Service and NOAA, as well as with the township, they're able to collect data on the river itself, but no one else is at the moment collecting data on the water coming in upstream. And all of us sitting on this call know that we get hit by that water first, since that's actually what's coming at us. And so these gauges are letting us actually gather that data to try and figure out what we can do next for that, potentially upstream, since the township's done quite a bit of work downstream with the weed harvesting and the river cleanup, which they're continuing to do. So we have some photos here. We have Jeff Henry and Mark Tembrink, who were braving the cold water in their waders to actually install the gauges there. And we have Dale Phillips down here as well. I cannot see who's in this one here, but we can see they're back in the trees there installing that gauge. And the 4th gauge here. So we have, these are the gauges that you're looking at. So, and then we also have these, what Carrie Loving refers to as witch sticks. And so these actually are measuring the water levels as well. So we have cameras around, we have 2 of these, I believe 2 of these on Ore Lake, Large Ore Lake. Is that right, Carrie, 2?
Yeah, 3 are on the lake and 1 is on the river side of the culvert.
Okay.
And all 4 of those have trail cameras taking 3 photographs a day. And we were lucky enough to catch this latest bloom up to 6.51 river gauge feet. So we have some very comprehensive data between the transducers, the witch sticks, and the river gauge readings, which during the iFlood submissions, I was adding those. And so we have a really good collection of data that connects the river gauge to those witch stick heights at 4 locations around the river, plus all the transducers. So even if we don't make a great case early in the year, by the end of this year, we're going to have a very comprehensive case to present, hopefully resetting flood levels.
Thank you, Carrie. Yeah, so one of the challenges we had last year was that we put the gauges in, I'm sorry, not last year, the year before, in 2021, we put the gauges in September, so we missed the high water throughout the summer and that major flood we had in August. And so this time around, and then last summer was low water, which is great for all of us, not great for data collection, but great for us. So this time around, as Carrie said, it's nice because we've got quite a bit of data because we were able to get it in before the recent flooding happened.
Right.
I'm going to pause just for a second. I see on here, Bob, you don't have any audio. Are you able to hear us now at all? Okay, Carrie, do you mind reaching out to him and like texting him or something to see if we can get him some support?
Sure.
Thank you. I know, Diane, you're helping. I appreciate that. And then I'm also going to check real quick and see. We have a number of other folks who've joined too. I appreciate it. All right, so just checking to see if Wendy has joined yet. So I'm hoping she'll be able to join soon and be able to chat a little bit about the data that we collected last summer and some next steps, but we'll kind of see when she's able to get on. So we'll kind of keep going from there. Hold on 1 second. I have a 5-year-old. Hold on.
You hear that nurse, that nun.
All right. So we'll go ahead and keep going then. So the other thing I wanted to mention, I don't really have an image here for it, but I just wanted to mention, I'll put it up so you can see the name. We also, starting last fall, we started working with the Army Corps. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, they had they had actually put together the flood inundation study that came out back in, well, the final report came out in December of 2019. And they, so that study was the one that where they actually went around and identified the elevation of the different properties around Orr Lake. And they were comparing that to what levels people would likely have water at, depending on the depth of the water at the time. And just checking, I apologize. And so they were able to pull all that information together, which was great because that helped us get a sense of the importance of the weed harvesting downriver. However, the challenge is, again, all of you know sitting here, is that wasn't actually helping us getting any insight on the water that's coming in upstream and what that actually means, particularly because all of us sitting here knows that upstream, all of the water, so the water within that South Orr Creek watershed goes all the way up to M59. So it includes all of Brighton Lake, that whole area, that whole space, all the way up to M59, which means all of the development going on in the Brighton, city of Brighton and beyond is impacting that water. So now instead of the water flowing, filtrating into the ground, we have more impervious surfaces, causing more runoff, causing likely more water to us. However, you and I can all just sit here and say that, but we don't have the data to actually show that. And so we've been able to partner with them. Excitingly, it's a $150,000 study that is completely funded by the Army Corps itself, along with the USGS. No money from the township or the county or anyone else, just from the federal government. And they actually are doing another flood inundation study, but specifically looking at South Orr Creek and Dubrova Creek. And so they're going to be looking to see where the water flow is. They're going to be coming out on the next few months to do some surveying in different areas, looking at most of the South Orr Creek watershed. And when they were out in the fall, we were able to convince them to also look at the areas around Dubrova Creek. So they're using our data that we're collecting, as well as their own survey data, to actually put together this study. And the benefit of this study is that the end goal is for them to identify potential flood mitigation efforts along likely South Orr Creek and possibly Dubrova Creek as well. That won't actually lead to changes, but them identifying those allows us as an organization to then work with the township and actually take that and submit it for either statewide grants or even federal grants to actually do something to help mitigate the water coming in. So this is actually a really, really big step for us because we'll have that data to then take it to the state and say, look, this is what we can do. The federal government through the Army Corps has already identified this is what we can do. Here's where we can do it. And then actually, can we get the money to do it? And there is a lot of money out there for efforts like this, particularly in wetland areas, which we all know there's a lot of wetlands, both along Dubrova Creek and South Oar Creek. So there is a lot of potential to get that funding. So it's exciting that they're actually working on this study. Now, the one thing I will say is the Army Corps is not particularly fast with it. So before, when they did this study, it was funded, I believe, in 2014, and the final result came out in 2019. I'm hoping that we can yeah, I know. I'm hoping we can push them along a little bit faster than that. In fact, I was just emailing with their director today. So I'm trying to regularly ping them to remind them that we're here and they need to come out and collect their data and work on it, with the goal that maybe by next summer, we will actually have those results, fingers crossed, but don't hold your breath. So it's kind of where we are. It's an exciting thing, not particularly fast, but it is actually happening. So that is coming. I'm sorry I don't have photos because we don't want to take photos of where they're actually doing the surveying. So that's why it's a blank slide. Did anyone, I'm going to pause for a second before I keep going. Does anyone have any questions about that? And I will stop sharing just for a second for the folks that are here. Do people have any questions about any of the things that I've talked about so far before I keep going? Oh, Wendy is on. Hi, Wendy.
I have a question.
Yeah, Linda, go for it.
I saw the Army Corps of Engineers truck go by about a month ago.
Okay.
So they came down Riverside Drive. I mean, I'm always at the window because I'm always doing dishes. So, yep, I did see their truck.
You did
So-
say, yeah. So there's actually, so that's the study we have with them. I believe they might also be working with, I'm blanking on the federal organization, but they are also doing a water quality study.
Oh, okay.
Kurt, you may know a little bit more about that than I do. I think that might be maybe EPA might be who they're partnering with. Thinking a little bit more on the Brighton Lake area, but because Brighton Lake flows into us where we are, that might have also been why they were there. So if you see their car, it's not a guarantee it's our study, but they are doing work broadly in this area.
Okay.
So, yeah, but that's neat to hear it that you did
Yes.
see them. That's good. Cool. All right. Well, Wendy is on, which I'm very excited for. Thank you, Wendy, for taking time out of your evening away from your tiny humans to come chat with us. I am going to actually turn it over to you, if you don't mind. Wendy's going to share kind of the data we collected last summer and kind of our next steps and what all that means. So you are welcome to share your screen, Wendy.
Yes, let me get the correct thing up here. Can everybody see what we're looking at?
How can that go away?
A lot of
Oh,
wiggly
yes.
things. All right. So what we're seeing here, let me scoot down just a little bit. Actually, let's do this and make it a little bit smaller. Is the plots of the elevation corrected, so the survey corrected data that were collected at the 4 different locations, 2 on South Oar Creek and 2 on Dubrova, as well as the USGS gauge down at Hamburg. So down here at the very bottom in the black is the USGS gauge, and then there's Dubrova at Mohican is in the blue that's just above it. And then you've got in the gray is South Oar Creek at Partridge Point. In the orange is Dubrova at Hamel. And then we've got Dubrova at Mohican, or South Oar Creek at Hamburg, all the way up at the very top. So these are in elevation. So these are feet above sea level to look at essentially stage for each one of these locations throughout the time that we were able to collect data last year. And so that started in about March and then ended in about the beginning of November. And so we can kind of see how things are behaving over time. As should probably surprise nobody on this call, y'all didn't flood much last year. It was not a very busy year. And in many ways, that's great because it meant that you guys could use your driveways and you weren't sumping out your basements or your first floors. It is slightly less exciting for us hydrologists because we were kind of hoping for a big event or two to give you a little bit more information on what might be happening. But never fear, I'm sure that if we keep sticking them out there long enough, we will catch one. much
got
to the
one for
chagrin
you.
of everyone. Yeah, Carrie?
We've got one for you. It's already happened.
Oh.
Yep.
Right after y'all
Did
put
you-
the gauges in, it flooded. So
Yep.
we have,
Did you guys get smacked with the same stuff that we got up here in Isabella County? We hit moderate flood stage 3 times in 5 days. So
Well,
it went
3
up and then down and then up and then down and then up and
Yeah,
then down over here.
We started low and went up 18 inches at the gauge by my house in 3.5 weeks.
Okay.
Almost
All
a
right.
foot and a
Yeah.
half. Foot and a half, and it was on our yards. So, and
Yep.
like Amber said, it happened right when the river gauge read 6.5 basically, which is the action stage, which is what we wanted, the
Mhm.
original first
Mhm.
stage flood. So we now have data that says right at 6.5 where you guys moved the number. Guess what this looks like? And we have a whole bunch of flood data and photographic
Yeah.
evidence and everything else. So you're gonna have more to work with this year.
Well, good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's good information. The data points that we capture from these types of things are useful because this is how we talk about change making. And this is how we convince people at the decision making level that some of the things that they've decided from afar aren't necessarily going to be practical for day-to-day life. So that's in a certain way is good news for that,
Mm.
because without that kind of information, we don't get to be as convincing as we would like to be. Well, so as far as the other things that happened last year, this was a good proof of concept. It's interesting from a hydrology standpoint, and Amber and Carrie have heard me talk about this a little bit. You have very different responses on your 2 creeks. So if you take a look at your Dubrovas, which are going to be your blue and your orange here, you can see, so Dubrova at Mohican pretty closely ties with the gauge at Hamburg, the USGS gauge at Hamburg, and we would expect that because it is a little bit more closely hydrologically connected. So they're closer together. The flood plain is there, so the shape on those makes a little bit of sense there. You see a similar signal up at Hamel.
sorry,
Yeah.
Wendy, can I just like clarify? So the gauge at Dubrova Mohican is very close to where the outlet is to Ore Lake. So that's why she's saying it's like closer to the river downstream. So sorry, Wendy, I just clarified.
Can I
Uh,
ask a question real quick to Wendy, about the orange one, the Hamel line?
Yes.
So when I look at it with not knowing exactly how to interpret this data, it doesn't fluctuate that much, right?
It is not fluctuating as much as the other ones. That's correct.
Yes, okay, all right. And you're saying that is a pretty similar pattern as the purple line at the very top, which is the Hamburg
It's-
River, the river?
Hamburg Bridge.
Hamburg Bridge.
So the black line at the bottom, the blue
Yes.
line and the orange line actually look a lot more similar than,
Yeah,
so there's a muted response on the orange one. So it's a
Okay.
smaller response, but the shapes of the curves are more similar. So you kind of see a leading edge on those and a rounded edge on them that tells us that they're kind of behaving hydraulically similar.
Okay.
So when you think about not to get too much into the weeds here, but when you think about how a stream behaves, functionally the water that's coming through at any point that you're observing, so any place that you're standing on the side of a stream and you're watching water go through, and you can kind of graph it with time if you wanted to. You could hold a piece of graph paper and just go dot 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 dot. That's an integrated response of everything that happens above it in the watershed. So everything that's falling into your watershed comes through that single point in time. And so when we see things behaving hydraulically similar across the watershed, that tells us some information kind of about how processes are happening. The slightly more muted response and the lengthened times on these tell us something very different than if you take a look at, say, for example, the gray and the purple line. Do you see how there's those really kind of spiky responses?
yeah.
Hydrologists call that flashy behavior. So what's happening is rain is happening in your watershed and it's coming through the creek really quickly, and then it's going away. And then it's coming through the creek really quickly, and then it's going away. That contrasts with the more kind of wavy behavior that you're seeing in your Dubrova stuff. So your South Ore Creek behaves a lot more like an urbanized watershed. and your Dubrova is behaving quite a bit more like a floodplain watershed or something that has quite a bit of capacity to just kind of hold on to water. So lots of wetlands, like I said, lots of floodplains, not a lot of topography. All of that means things drain a little bit slower. Whereas when you have a very flashy urbanized watershed, typically, you're going to see much more of a response. So you've probably heard people talk about this idea of impervious cover. So lots of pavement in a watershed can make your floods worse. The reason that they say that is because the concrete doesn't hold on to the water. It just lets it go as fast as possible. And that's why you get those precipitation events and they go very, very sharp and then they go back down and they go very, very sharp and they go back down. So that flashy response is what we see when we see a lot of either impervious cover or shallow bedrock. You see this a lot actually out in the Mountain West when you start to get these flash flood events. So lots and lots of precipitation in a very short amount of time, you get a very flashy response on your creeks. So the fact that the two are behaving pretty differently is of interest. We're not sure why yet, but there's some things worth kind of thinking about and considering there, especially kind of in the context of your land use and then the ability for your area to kind of just hold on to water or release it really fast. So we've got some great proof of concept. We now have a good methodology for putting things out there and getting the data back, and getting some good information back. And we're starting to get some insights, even though we didn't have any major flood events in 2022. We've got some ideas of where we might be wanting to look next for more information.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Wendy, for sharing that. That's really helpful. So just kind of to explain it a little bit further, though some of you may already have picked up on this, when she was talking about the impervious surfaces, that's going to be thinking about all of those parking lots that are over like in the Brighton area that we keep getting more and more of. So anytime there's more development, we have more parking lots, that's more runoff. That's kind of more of what she's talking about here. So that's where we're seeing more in the South Oar Creek space than Dubrova Creek. So Wendy, can you just as like a final thing here, and then I'll open up if anyone else has questions for you before you head out. Can you kind of talk a little bit about like the next steps with regard to this, kind of where you're thinking we're heading next as well? So
Sure. I think that it'd be helpful for us to do a little bit more detailed work on looking at land use and land cover. So kind of getting an idea of what our percentages of impervious surface are versus wetlands and see how that has changed over time. So Lena's been working a little bit on this, going kind of towards the hindcast, looking basically from about year 2000s to present. I'd like to be able to extend those data sets a little bit further and get a little bit more quantitative. There's a few different things that we can kind of play around with on some of that, not just looking at percentages of cover, but proximity. So depending on where it is that you have some of this, we also can start looking at potentially some SWIM models. So looking at stormwater management and infrastructure modeling. I'll have to talk with our civil engineer or environmental engineer, Rod Lammers, about whether or not we can either find or purchase the FEMA or the EPA SWIM models and the HECRAS models for your area. The HECRAS ones we should be able to get pretty easily, but I don't know whether or not Brighton has a SWIM model. So SWIM is another software package that we use that focuses primarily on stormwater infrastructure. So it's called Stormwater Management Model. SWIM, SWMM is why I keep saying that, because kind of thinking about some of the ways that we mitigate parking lots and some of the mandates for putting in detention basins and wetlands and artificial management structures, and where those are can actually start to change a little bit of how we get those hydrologic responses. And so if there's some of that already built and available, that might be a good place to start doing a little bit of testing to see how things are changing and how that might be affecting some of what you guys are seeing. And then in addition to that, we need to figure out exactly the catch area for Mohican, or no, not for Mohican, for Dubrova. And so we think we know where it started. So it's over in here on Metro Park, but we don't actually have a really good idea of how much area contributes to Dubrova Creek. It's not very well mapped. And that's something that we need to spend some time kind of figuring out, because again, where this water is coming from is going to start to affect how we see the shape of these responses, which can be pretty important for the things that you guys have been looking at as well, and the things you're being affected by.
Thank you, Wendy. I appreciate that. That's really helpful. So this I have to just say, this is everything Wendy's talking about is a nice reminder why we are so lucky to have her and Rod and so many others helping us, because the resources and their knowledge and background is moving us so much further forward than we ever were before. So I appreciate you saying that, Wendy. This is nice. And the nice thing too, I just shared with everyone about the Army Corps study. This is something we can also pair with some of the work they're doing, which actually, Wendy, you talked about those models. We might even be able to connect with them. They might have that. I'm sure they have access to those as well. So, yeah. Did other folks have questions for Wendy before she steps away?
It's just odd that the lines are so different, I guess, to me. I understand that some lines paired with other ones, but it's strange that everything is, has its own view, its own pattern. So just curious about that, why they're so different.
Yeah, it's
Elevation.
definitely, it's clear that these are two different subwatersheds for sure. They definitely do not behave similarly, but they have fairly different land uses. They have fairly different topographies. They have a lot of different management that's been going into them as well. They're different sizes. So a lot of that will end up contributing to the differences in shapes that you're going to see here. It will be interesting to start kind of trying to elucidate arrival times. So we did this very briefly with the smaller events here, and we can see that your peak arrival times are happening sooner on Dubrova than they are at the USGS gauge at Hamburg. So this is good information to have. It's exactly what Carrie was just talking about before, as I had started in, which is y'all's lawns were already flooded when the action stage hit further downstream, because there's been some conversation amongst the management officials and the way that the HECRAS and some of the US Army Corps simulations from a few years ago, so not the newer stuff, but from a few years ago, were suggesting that a good chunk of what you guys were experiencing was kind of functionally just kind of damming and backing up of that water. And that may be a contributing factor, but it is not necessarily accurate to say that you guys are only getting that. Because we're seeing the upstream flows coming in, and you're experiencing that before we're seeing those action stages further down. And so we can see some of that here. I would like to see how that behaves in some of these larger events, because I think that there's going to be some information that we could potentially pull apart there if we can capture a couple more of those large events, so we can kind of get what happens at these smaller events, what happens at these more moderate events, and then what happens at these larger events, and kind of see whether or not they're behaving similarly, or if there are different processes controlling the flooding that you're experiencing at different stages.
Thank you, Wendy. What she was referring to with that kind of damming is, for example, the weeds, right? So we know the weeds impact the water flow downstream, but we still have the water coming in upstream. So this is helpful to see kind of that difference in reaction between downstream and the upstream here.
Oh, I have a question. Is this data in any way capturing the lake level? I know
So
it's
the
capturing the
best-
flow.
Yeah, so the best that we probably have on that would have been, we had a stage measurement that was actually at the outfall of south of Orr Lake. However, we lost the gauge, so it's got yoinked. We think maybe it got hit by a propeller,
Oh.
or something like that. So we lost that one in 2022. We've redeployed it now in 2023. So hopefully we will capture those data this year. So we are trying to get that information, but we don't have it for last year's information. We actually
Okay.
have some for 2021. This is just last year's data. We have some data from 2021. There are a few issues with pressure response on a handful of the transducers, but interestingly enough, we actually have better data for the outlet from 2021 because we didn't have the pressure issues at the outlet. So we actually do have some pretty good 2021 record, and you guys had some walloping good storms that year, and so we have quite a few of the stage responses there. That we can compare. We just don't have a full 2-year record yet, but
Okay.
hopefully this year.
Okay.
And that was the gauge that's at the outflow into the Huron from Little Ore Lake is what she was referring. So we lost it this past year, but we do have it from September through November of 2021. So, and a new one. this
Okay,
year.
that was my question. I didn't see a graph for that one.
Yeah, that one got lost, sadly.
But Wendy, though, where we see the graphs
Yeah.
bump upwards, that's obviously higher water, right? And so,
Yes.
and so you could compute from this a rate of drainage, right? Over time, you can see how it's dropping back to a normal level,
Yes.
nominal level.
Yes.
Mm.
So the reason why hydrologists really like to capture those really big events is the same thing as whenever we think about risk and probability on anything that might happen. There's an inverse proportion to the frequency of tiny events versus very, very big events. And so we get lots and lots of tiny events and very, very few big events. And we want to be able to potentially predict risk across that whole profile. If we only draw out your lines for stage and recession and peak flows and things like that, based on the cluster of tiny events, we have big margins of error as we get to the big events. The more of those larger events we capture, the more we can kind of give you a better bracket of your probability of things happening. So how often, how big, and some of those responses. And in certain cases, not always, but there are different processes and mechanics that can kind of control your small events versus your medium range events versus your large events. And so capturing all of those helps us kind of elucidate some of those processes as well.
I guess the one thing I'm not still sure about, and I kind of think I understand what you're saying, but I'm not sure, is a lot of times when we get water in the lake, because the water doesn't turn over and flow out as fast as, it flows in sometimes, the water stays high for a longer period of time than, other bodies of water might. And I'm just wondering if we're going to be able to tease out that data by looking at these two flow meters, because we all know when the water floods, sometimes it's 3 weeks before, it gets down enough to a level that's more normal. And I'm just wondering if that's going to be captured with these.
Well, some of that can be captured because we're capturing not absolute values, but deltas, changes in the height on those witch sticks. So since we know Wendy's going to have this data, we will have the river gauge data, and then we have 3 shots a day of cameras on the witch sticks, which is telling you how many inches the water is varying over time. When you consolidate all that data, we will be able to say, here was a rise, here was a flash based on the transducer data. Here's what the 4 locations on the lake measured throughout that days or weeks. And if you put all that together, you're basically going to be able to say, here's how much the bloom was, and here's how long it took for it to drain out, and what did that do to the actual level of the lake itself. So a combination of all these things is going to present a pretty good package.
It definitely will. Carrie's absolutely right. The longevity that we'll get off of the witch sticks will help with some of that. The other thing we need to keep in mind, and I know that y'all are painfully aware of it, but we have to kind of think about it from a terms of geometry. Depending on your flood, it's not as though the same area is being flooded. So when you get a very large flood, part of the reason why it sticks around so long is because it's having to drain a much, much larger area. So you're draining all of the floodplain essentially every single time you get a bigger and bigger flow. And so some of what you're seeing why it takes so long for it to come down is because y'all are in a pretty flat part of a basin. And so a tiny increase in your height means a large width of inundation. And a lot of what we're talking about doing with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is looking at some of those dynamics as to why you maintain that level, because the HECRAS model, which is the model that they're going to be using for this, it's we call it a bathtub model, where basically a lot of what we would be looking at there is your area of inundation for heights of flood. And when you have a bigger height of flood, you're going to have a much larger area of inundation. It's not just the channel that has to drain. It's not just the lake that has to drain. It's a lot of the wetlands, and not just the wetlands near you, but the wetlands upstream of you all have to drain down before your stuff is going to start to dry out, because it's at a higher topographic level. So it's got a higher elevation than you. So all of that has to kind of filter through and drain out, which is why it takes so long for you guys to dry out sometimes from those
Right.
very, very big events.
So we'll be able to capture that. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so between the witch sticks and these observations and the HECRAS bathtub models, we can get a better understanding of how all of those dynamics are at play together.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Mm.
think that's really important for people who, are flooded, is the length, the weeks, the days, that they suffer. And more, damage is happening and more pollutants are getting in the water and, just things like that. So anything we can do to sort of capture that picture is super important, I think, for the people who live on the lake. I think you'll get more buy-in and support, and maybe even funds if you need it, if we can show that, we're really trying to get a snapshot picture of the impact it has on you as a property owner.
Yeah, and I think that's where Wendy and all of our wonderful experts are the most helpful, is we're going to be able to put a comprehensive story together, which is, in the past, people have talked about, some of the folklore around here. Well, it did this in 85 and it did this in 92. What we need is a really comprehensive package that says, we've studied this thing for 3 years. Here's the data. Put it in some clear presentations and go present that to people who can either help us get funding, or at least can now understand that we didn't just take a cursory look at this. We seriously studied the thing. And that's where Wendy and everybody else has been so helpful for us, is that we now have definitely empirical data that we can go present to people and say, look, this isn't just us noticing water on the yard, like what's in front of you right now. We have actual facts to prove it.
Yeah.
That was the most important thing about this whole study, is that we have some credibility in our story, if you will.
So I know Wendy was offering up her time here. Does anyone else have any other questions for Wendy before she can go say more goodnights to her kids?
Oh, they're in bed. We got them in bed. They're
Okay,
good.
that's good.
They may not be sleeping, but the doors are shut and we are in bed.
That's fair. Yeah, one of mine keeps coming, so
It's
Doing-
still
does it-
daylight out.
yeah, I know it's still light out. It makes it very hard for tiny humans to sleep. Does anyone have any other questions for Wendy about this?
Thank you.
Well, just that other comment she made earlier about how it looks like Ore Creek, we get the water really quickly, and then Dubrova comes later. That probably contributes also to the longevity, right? We get some early, some late, and it's just always high.
Awesome. Well, Wendy, thank you very much for jumping on and sharing this with everyone. This was really helpful.
No
And
problem.
most importantly, thank you for all of your help. We are very lucky to have you. And so
No
many
problem.
others.
Thanks, Wendy.
All right.
you.
Take
Thank you.
care and let me know if you have any follow-up questions.
Okay, we will.
All right.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and go back a little bit to what we were chatting about before, which is going to actually relate some So I'm going to jump ahead for a moment. So one of the things that we've done in the past is we've partnered with a high school called Innovation Academy. They're an alternative high school in Howell. Jay was on, had to jump off, but he's one of the teachers here. Actually wonderfully see Deanna in my little Zoom window here. Deanna put us in touch with Jay. She is his mom. And so we are lucky to partner with them. They are high school students that have actually come out and worked with us on different projects. So the top picture here, you can see them actually kayaking. So thank you to those who volunteered equipment and help in just driving equipment, Carrie. The high schoolers came out, we have GPS units, and they actually, when Wendy was just talking about Dubrova Creek and not actually having mapped the watershed for Dubrova Creek, they are in the process of doing that, which is really exciting. So right now, the map for South Ore Creek, it was put together by the Huron River Watershed Council, still accurate, still very extensive, again, very large. The challenge is Dubrova Creek is a much smaller creek, and at the moment within the Huron River Watershed mapping, because they're the most recent group that's done this, they've kind of lumped that in with the Huron, like the watershed right along the Huron River, which we know is not actually the case. We know Dubrova actually flows into Ore Lake and then into the Huron. What we don't know, as Wendy was talking about, is that we don't actually know how big that watershed is for Dubrova Creek. And so what that means is we don't know where all the water you were just looking at on the data she shared, we don't exactly know where that's coming from, which makes it then hard to think about mitigation efforts. So these students wonderfully are actually helping us do that. So they're gathering data on it. They're going to be working on that mapping partly the end of this year and also into next year. So that's one of the big things they're working with us on, and we are partnering, of course, with them. Diane and I have gone there and talked with the students about that. Recently, we actually partnered with them. They submitted a grant to actually purchase more equipment to continue this partnership. So they're looking to purchase equipment partly for like kayaks and other GPS units and so on to do more of this partnering work. Also some work thinking about water quality, which I know Kurt is in your space. So they are looking to continue this partnership, hopefully with some grant funding to support their teachers and their students to be able to do it more extensively. The other thing I just wanted to mention with Innovation Academy is last year we had Lena join. She was a student at Innovation Academy. She was a high schooler. Wendy had just talked briefly about her. She actually had done an entire study where she actually looked at where wetlands were changing in relation to land development within the South Ore Creek watershed. So that entire watershed all the way up to M59, she identified where wetlands were increasing and decreasing or changing in type of wetland, also where the land use. So the development itself, the development is increasing or decreasing, really just increased every time she identified it. And also where that development was actually encroaching into wetlands and also into waterways. So that was a really unique study that she did. She used ArcGIS to do that. She and I and Jay and Diane and Jay and Wendy, I'm sorry, actually are in the process of publishing that piece. So it's currently in the next, hopefully a couple of weeks, going to be sent off to a publishing company. And once that comes out, fingers crossed, it gets accepted, I will make sure to share that with you. But you can, if you want to get kind of reorient yourself to the work that she did, which is really important work and informs this like kind of next step of quantifying that, the wetland changes and the land use and whatnot. She actually put together a YouTube video when she did that. It's on our website. If Diane, if you or somebody else could maybe find a link to that from our website and put it in the chat, that'd be great to remind folks to be able to go back and see it. But it's a really nice video. She explains really carefully what she did. But it's helpful to see kind of where the wetlands and the land development were changing throughout that South Ore Creek watershed. So those are kind of some things that we're working on with Innovation Academy and some next steps with them, which is very exciting. And fingers crossed, the grant gets funded and some more equipment as well to help with that. So another thing that I wanted to kind of in relation to, I'll kind of take a step back for a second. The other thing that we've been working on is the FEMA grants for elevating homes. So we had done this last year. Is where we had actually helped folks try and get money through FEMA to actually elevate their homes. So we had put together at the time 2 grant proposals with partnering with Hamburg Township, one for what's called FMA, flood mitigation assistance, and the other one for BRIC, building resilient infrastructure communities. Both of these grants are to provide homeowners funding to be able to elevate their homes above the floodwater, because there's a number of folks, as we know, who are kind of stuck in it. Basically, what this means is FEMA provides 75% of the cost to elevate the home and the homeowner pays the other 25%. Excitingly, we did just hear today that Hamburg Township Board of Trustees today, actually during the strategic planning, did vote to move forward to submit those applications again, which is wonderful. Mark Tembrink on this call has been wonderful in being able to kind of take the reins on this. I haven't been able to do as much this time around. So he's actually kind of leading this effort with the FEMA grant, starting with what we did before. We have 12 properties that are interested in participating. 2 that are for BRIC, 10 for FMA, the flood mitigation assistance. And in both cases, for all those, it'd be elevating homes. So we have more properties. Last time we had 6 properties. This time we have 12 properties, folks interested in participating. The other exciting thing this time around is that we're able to work with Hastings Testing. They are actually going to be coming out and writing up specific estimates for each property for elevating homes, building on what Dale Phillips did last year, which is wonderful, or last time we went around. So we're kind of learning from what we did before, since the previous ones weren't approved. The other thing that's exciting this time around is we're going to be able to partner with an organization called Community Engineering Corps. They are a nonprofit organization that partners with communities just like ours, and they actually do the engineering designs for this. So instead of having to write the engineering design cost into the grant, which makes it less likely to be funded because the benefit cost analysis would be too high, potentially, in this time around, being able to partner with the Community Engineering Corps, they take on that cost and that effort, and they actually write the engineering designs for every house to be able to elevate them, which is pretty exciting. So we're in the process of moving forward with them. They also provide that pro bono cost as well. So we have these kind of unique opportunities to be able to try and have a better and more competitive grant applications this next time. The applications, the notice of intent is due to the state of Michigan on October 1st. And then the actual grant application would go to FEMA in January of 2024, and we'd find out around April of 2024. So I have Mark's contact information if there's any other folks besides the ones that are currently participating. If any other folks would be interested in participating, feel free to reach out to Mark and let him know. 2 things to know about this is that you would have to agree to pay the 25%. FEMA would provide the 75%. You'd pay the 25% of the cost. The other requirement with these is that FEMA does require that properties keep flood insurance in perpetuity, meaning forever. So this doesn't actually remove you from having to ever pay flood insurance. You do still have to pay flood insurance. However, because your house is much higher, your flood insurance should be a lot lower. So there is that advantage. So if you're interested, reach out to Mark. I'm going to keep going throughout the other things that we have here so that we have a little bit of time at the end to kind of let people ask questions and chat a little bit more. So then some other things to kind of remind you of as we move into the spring, summer, fall, hopefully not flood season, but you never know. We've already had one flood. Is that last year Hamburg Township did change the flood levels we talked. It's now, as it says here, at 7 feet, not 6.5 feet. So currently, I just took the screenshot the other day. The river gauge is at around 4.5 feet after this recent flood. That doesn't mean it's going to stay. As reminders with the change, those changes were based on their thinking as to what would count to be either an action stage or minor flooding. So minor flooding previously was considered 6.5 feet. Now it's at 7 feet. These are the qualifications that the National Weather Service says needs to be in place for something to be designated as minor flooding. So the water over the banks or in yards, no buildings flooded, but some waters may be under the buildings that are on stilts, personal property in low-lying areas may need to be moved, the water around, things like that. If we think about even those photos that I shared at the beginning about the recent flooding we had where the water did hit 6.5 feet, we are seeing a lot of these things. So we do have some data here to show that we actually are hitting minor flooding at that 6.5 feet, in some cases even lower. But as of right now, the township has said with partnership with the National Weather Service, it's at 7 feet. Kind of some minor reminders with that. So 6.5 feet's action stage. This over here is the Hamburg Township's response. So once it hits 6.5 feet, the National Weather Service will start issuing flood forecasts. They'll do some more monitoring. The fire and police department will be kind of monitoring the area. 7 feet is when we actually get to flood stage, which that's where the township will actually kind of kick into gear and start responding. So after reaching 7.5 feet with a forecast of after reaching 7 feet with a forecast of 7.5 feet, that's when the Pat Hall, the township supervisor, will contact the emergency meeting or call emergency meeting and the potential of a no wake. The fire department will be involved and so on. This is through the township. So this no wake that it's referring to is when the township will be able to actually send out like the jet skis, the police officers on jet skis on Orr Lake or on the river and say, hey, you can't be, you have to be traveling with no wake and monitoring that and giving tickets and so on. That would not happen until the river hits 7.5 feet. 7 feet is flooding now. Once it hits 7 feet, if there is a forecast of getting to 7.5 feet, that's when the Hamburg Township would pursue that potential no wake. The challenge with having the police come out is that by state regulation, a township can only call on this resolution. You can see it here, MCL 324 and so on. This no wake resolution, a township can only use that 1, maybe 2 times a year at most. So they do have to be a bit sparingly with that. So it's a bit challenging because that means that by township regulation, there really isn't a no wake until minimum 7 feet. They won't monitor until 7.5 feet. All of that's to say, last year we had worked with other community members, many of you who are on this call right now, to actually community-wide install a no wake on Orr Lake. This is not something the police will monitor. This is something that we as residents can like talk with our neighbors about. Homeowners Association presidents will talk with folks as well, put out notices. Basically, what we've decided as a community is that once the river hits 6.5 feet, there will be a no wake on Orr Lake. This does not help you folks on the river, which I'm really sorry about. We need to figure that out. We are in the process of doing it, but for right now, at least Orr Lake will have the 6.5 feet no wake there. So once the river hits 6.5 feet, folks around the lake will put up no wake signs at various entrances, along docks along the lake and so on, to try and remind people. We cannot call the police at this point. They can't do anything, but we can at least try and help keep an eye on each other so that people can have their properties safe, that no one gets damaged, boats don't damage docks, boats don't get damaged from docks, all of those things that are underwater. So those things to keep in mind when we hit the 6.5 feet. The last thing I will say with that is a reminder, and a lot of folks did it this time around, which I really appreciate, is that when the water does start to get high, please, please, please submit postings on the iFlood site. This is iflood.org. Basically, you're going to go in, it'll ask for your location, it'll just take it automatically from your phone. You take a picture of it, you mark these indicators here of is it at the ground floor or the yard or wherever the water is, how deep it is, have we had recent rain, how heavy was the rain, and submit it. This is really, really important for us to be able to take all of that data back to the township and show and say, hey, at 6.5 feet, we are hitting those markers. If I go back to these categories, at 6.5 feet, we are hitting these categories. Here's all the data to show this. The river was at this point, but we can't do that unless people are posting on that iFlood site, as people did this last time, which is amazing. Thank you for doing that. Please continue to do that if we end up with higher water. And Diane just put in the chat a link to the YouTube page that Lena had put together from her study looking at the wetland changes and land development changes and whatnot. So it's another thing to go remind yourself of. It's a great one. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point. I know I just shared a whole bunch of information and talked a lot, and I want to save the last few minutes here for folks to ask questions, kind of think about like where going forward, what are we doing, all of those things and whatnot. So I'm going to stop talking, and please jump in if you have questions or other comments that you'd like to share.
Nice one.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Kurt
Yeah,
wanted
yeah.
to share something.
Yeah, I just need a couple of minutes. And even though, really the scope of what Carol and I do generally is the lake quality and the water quality monitoring for our lake, there is a link between the water levels and the water quality. It's not always real apparent. And in fact, I'm still looking at the data that we got from Eagle for last season, 2022. And, because of the low water levels of the lake, and also almost near drought conditions, you know, all summer long last year. We had a great year for water quality. Most of the time we had, you know, very low, if any, total phosphorus readings. Water quality was good. Chlorophyll was good. You know, that's the small green cast that the lake gets normally in August. And, you know, we really only had 3, maybe 4 algal blooms, which
Right.
are pretty closely related to the total phosphorus readings that we get. That was in July, and then we had a couple of small ones in September. So all that was really good, and hopefully we'll have another year repeat of the conditions last year, but there's no guarantees, and in fact, the record says otherwise. So it's really important, especially if we do have high water events this year, we have more flooding events. The fertilizing, you know, we got to try to get the word out. And, you know, Facebook is only so successful to our neighbors that, you know, fertilizing their waterfront lawns is not a good idea. When we get those rains, it's just going to all end up in the lake.
And both our
Thanks.
neighbors fertilized despite what we've said to both of them. So good luck with that message.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's going to have any success, but it's
Thanks for
so
sharing.
odd to me that anybody would buy on the lake and not understand, you know, that the very thing that they value is at risk with the way they're behaving, but they don't get it.
Or
Thanks
you
for
would be
sharing that,
surprised,
yes.
when we lived on Wolverine Lake, there were people who moved over there from the city and they brought Chemlon with them. They just
Yeah.
don't think of it. There's people that just don't connect dots. And so,
Well,
Or
yeah,
won't.
one of
That's
the
what
one of the challenges with flooding is that, and this is a conversation I've had with the township multiple times, is that anytime we have flooding, that means everything that people put on their lawns, their yards, the roads, everything upstream, all still comes to us. All of the
Yeah.
invasive species from upstream comes to us. All of our invasive species goes downstream. So this is like a consistent challenge. So anytime we do have anything around on land or whatever, that does affect everyone else within the watershed. So yeah, I think that's a good point. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and
I
then,
know we're at- well, I know
yeah.
we're at the time. Let me see if anyone has any other questions
Right,
first before we share more.
Good job.
Does anyone have any questions or any other things related to the work that we're doing or the flooding or anything like that before continuing other conversations?
well, I had one more comment about the flooding,
Sure.
Carrie. We do need those culvert bypass pipes with the super pumps in them. That still is the best idea that we've ever come up with.
thank you. Yeah, the penstocks, I guess that was a benefit of
Penstock
living
dams.
out west near the Hoover Dam and seeing how well they
Yeah.
work.
Exactly.
That would also be,
Well,
it would
so
also be
those
a
are-
very low cost thing to do, so.
Those actually were mentioned by the Army Corps as a potential possibility. So when they pulled together their flood inundation study, part of that study is identifying potential solutions or responses or mitigation efforts to the flooding, whether it's there or upstream or wherever. And so they did mention that. They mentioned a lot of things. They mentioned retention ponds, on South Oar Creek. There was a lot of things
Penstock
that
dams, yeah.
yes, there were a lot of things that they just mentioned in passing, basically saying there's a lot of possibilities that could come for to be able to help mitigate the floodwaters. So that's, you laugh, but it is potentially a possibility. Hard part is that's very expensive. However, if they suggest it and the data shows it, we actually then have justification to get grant money to put something in. So there's
but
lots
I
of
think-
possibilities down the road.
But I also think to Kurt's point, it's a lot less expensive than trying to rebuild that entire culvert and bridge, which I don't think is even possible at this point.
Right.
Right.
So putting some penstock drains on either side of it's probably possible and not cheap, but doable.
Right.
And again, the Army Corps of Engineers, if they really say, look, you guys really have to have improved outflows, because that culvert was designed back in the Jurassic era, when we didn't have this kind of runoff into our lake. So I'm sure that culvert area, I'm hoping their data says that it's undersized, because if they say that, then we can build a case for penstocks.
Yeah. And then you have to remember too, that's also only one factor in this, right? That's the
Sure.
outflow like Wendy was talking about, whereas we know Dubrova Creek tends to hold more water, which is like also potentially causing flooding. So my guess is there's probably going to be multiple mitigation suggestions
Yeah.
in different places, and
Yeah.
potentially that's
No
of
one knob is
one
gonna
of them.
fix this. Yeah.
Exactly. When I talk with folks, I was telling Mark earlier today about this, I keep referring to this whole problem as like a puzzle. And so we're trying to put together all of the puzzle pieces to make sense of it and come up with that, whatever that solution, multiple solutions might be. So it takes a lot of efforts in a lot of different ways to do this. Does
Agreed.
anyone have any other questions or also comments?
Yes, for
yeah.
Carrie, we talked about the gauge at the culvert being destroyed or whatever.
Yes.
Has it been replaced, and did we get any data on this last flood?
There's a new one in its place, a spare that
Okay,
Amber Wendy had, so it's replaced.
Mhm.
The
Good.
original one that was lost is still down in the water, and the idea is if I can get a hold of somebody with a metal detector, we might be able to find it laying in the muck. And if we can,
Oh.
it's got years worth of data on it. So I haven't
I-
gotten to the point yet. So
I have a really good one that goes underwater, so
that would be our best
You might be our winner.
chance at finding that thing.
being a meteorite hunter, it comes in handy. So I can probably help with that, Carrie. The other question is the last flood, like not last year, not last summer, but the summer before. I observed there, when it hits 6.5 feet, all kinds of debris floats down the river here.
Yes.
So, and that's everything from cattail mats to trees and all kinds of stuff. And it tends to pile up in various places, especially on the Lakeland Trails bridge pilings. So with regard to action stage, 6.5 feet is no longer action stage.
So
What constitutes action, first of all? Would patrolling the river for blockages be part of the action, or are we just talking about instilling no wake? Is
So-
that where it ends?
so Tony, I appreciate you saying all of that and asking that question. So those categories are based on the National Weather Service designation. So their designation of action stage is that then they will start issuing warnings of potential flooding, which at that point we're all flooded, so it's kind of a moot point. But that is what action stage is defined as by the National Weather Service. So the way this works is that the township suggests to the National Weather Service, this is what flood stage should be, which is that minor flooding based on whatever they think. But then the National Weather Service is the one who takes whatever steps depending on whatever the level is. So action stage, let me go back. I will actually share it because I can show you exactly what it is. Action stage is right here. I know it's kind of small, but it says a stage which when reached by a rising stream represents the level where the National Weather Service or a partner user needs to take some type of mitigation action in preparation for possible significant hydrologic activity. The type of action taken varies for each gauge location. Gauge data should be closely monitored by an affected people if the stage is above action stage. So that is what the National Weather Service designates as the action stage. The township's response to that is when that happens, when we hit the 6.5 feet right here, or up to that point, they'll get, right here. When we hit 6.5 feet, the action stage, that's when the National Weather Service will begin issuing flood forecasts. They'll be monitoring it, and the fire and police department will just start physically monitoring the area. That is what's considered action stage. And so
I think I was kind of hoping for more specific actions, like a protocol. What do we go through here? What do we do versus, just say they're going to do something and maybe they don't do it.
So I think that's a great question. The hard part is what I just showed you is the protocol. So no one has protocol. We can come up with our own, which I think that would be great if we had a plan of what we are going to. I know that we have the plan of like collecting data on iFlood and putting up the no wake signs, which again doesn't help you, which is a problem. But we absolutely could. And I think that's a really good point. We should, Andrea or Diane, make a note. We can start talking, and I'd love to talk with you, Tony, about possibilities for what we could do at that point. for us as residents.
Yeah, just from my vantage point, certainly part of that protocol should be, and this is really the only point I'm making, going down the river and finding blockages.
Yeah.
Because that was a significant part of the 2 summers ago, the other summer.
Yeah.
That's a significant part of what was happening.
Yeah.
Once the blockage was removed, which took some
Right.
time, first of all, to identify and then to remove.
Right.
It drained fairly quickly after that.
Yeah, well, you were instrumental in identifying that, which I really appreciated. The one thing to know though, because you had mentioned that the debris does tend to collect at the Lakelands Trail Bridge. The township last year, I believe it is, did receive funding to actually replace that bridge.
Yeah.
So that it doesn't have those big posts there, so that it won't be collecting
be good.
debris in the same way.
Right.
That doesn't mean it's gonna happen fast. We all know construction and all those things take time. They have to get huge approvals through Eagle to be able to go in, because of course it involves the river and things like that. But they do have money now and plans to replace that bridge. So in the future, fingers crossed, there will hopefully not be as many blockages. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking for debris. I love that idea, Tony. I think that's really important. And let's talk about
Who looks and who who does it, right?
Thank you.
What do we
The
do?
only semi-official thing they ever do is when the township wants that resident cleanup thing and everybody walk down the river and pick up stuff.
Yep, which
Other
is
than that,
happening.
Tony, I don't think there's anything official that actually goes on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe we could put together a wish list of what we wish might happen during flood stage.
Mhm.
And when we reach the action stage, then we start going down that list and doing those things,
They
whether
do.
it's just us or something we can involve Hamburg Township in.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. That's awesome. And that does remind me, thank you for saying that. We did talk with Pat today. They are going to do the river cleanup again this year. It's tentatively scheduled for July 29th.
Okay,
For
nice.
folks, they need help. So anyone who's able to come help, even if it's stand on a boat and grab things out of the river or from other people, you don't have to wield a chainsaw. You can just help move stuff. That would be great. I know Mark helped last summer. I wasn't able to. I'm hoping to be able to do it this summer, but the more folks who can help, the better it is for everyone. So.
Yep.
And I will let you know once it's officially scheduled, but that is the current tentative date. But yeah, Tony, that's a great idea. I love that idea. Are there other thoughts or questions or anything from people?
Really interesting.
Thanks to Dale and Carrie and others to clean the logs out of the culvert a week and a half ago. That was a big help
Yes.
too.
Yeah, I
That
didn't get that
was-
picture. I'm sorry.
That, I know, that was a shock to me. I don't know that I've ever seen a 24-inch, 35-foot log all the way across the culvert blocking the output, so.
No way.
Oh, yeah, it took us 3.5 hours with chainsaws to get the thing out of the water and cut it up. It was huge. And then there was another pile of debris that broke loose from the island. And Bill Frederick next door and I, we ended up taking 2 trailers full of lumber out of the water and hauling it over and storing it. So the
Wow.
winter ice storm did a lot of damage. And what happened was is we got up to 6.5 feet. It all broke loose and came right down to the culvert. So.
Oh my God.
Oh,
Yeah, which is a good point. I think, Tony, your comment about having a plan of what to do is a really good one, especially that with the ice storms. Yeah, there's gonna be a lot of debris coming.
There's
down the
more
river.
debris. Yeah,
Yeah.
More debris. And
every
right
year
now,
nature
Tony,
produces more.
Yeah.
yeah, and right now, Tony, you're right. It's just sort of hit or miss. The residents trying to watch out for each other, but there's nothing really official that lets us go do something in some semi-regular basis. It says, let's go help stuff.
Yeah.
Sounds like a separate meeting.
Yes. I
Yes.
agree.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's plan that. Well, thank you, everyone. It was so good to see everyone's faces. I'm happy to stay on and chat if anyone wants to, but I know we are over. Please go be free. Go sleep.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Amber,
Good to see you all.
Thank you.
I'm good.
Amber, thank you for putting this together and
Oh.
updating us all again. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We
Yeah, and
appreciate-
we'll try and have some more meetings more regularly throughout the summer. Mhm.
Kurt and
Okay.
Carol, thank you for what you do.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone.